in today's video, I want to talk about how you can write a story with multiple equal protagonists. First of all, I want to discuss, can you have a story with multiple equal protagonists? And yes, you can. However, it is much rarer to see a story with equal protagonists because it can be very difficult to do this. The reason why it is so difficult to do this is because when you're having a story with multiple equal protagonists, you will need to ensure that the story is very equally told between the protagonist's perspective. When you have a story which will typically have one main protagonist and then other Deuteragonists, which are the secondary protagonists, in these types of stories, the protagonist will typically be the one to tell the story, and you'll see the story from their perspective, and the story will follow this character's main goals. And in this kind of story, the Deuteragonist goal is to assist the protagonist with their goals. However, in the case of creating a story with equal protagonists, whether it be maybe two equal protagonists or even more protagonists who equally tell the story, this can make it a little bit more difficult for you as the author because you have to ensure that each of the protagonist goals are significant and they all have a very important role in the story. So in today's video, let's talk about how you can write a story with two or more equal protagonists and how you can effectively tell that story to your audience through mangas, comics, or light novels. Before I get fully into this video, I also want to answer the question of how many main protagonists is too many? And honestly, this is really up to you and the story you're telling, and I don't want to limit your creativity in this. However, personally, to keep things easier for you, I would recommend having maybe 1 to 4 main protagonists at the most. You could even have 5 main protagonists, but I do recommend keeping it more on the smaller side because the more main protagonists you have, the more perspectives you show on the story and the more difficult it might be for you to write your story. I have seen some stories work well with a lot of main protagonists, such as Yumi Neko, which is a very complex story. But it is important for you to consider what works best for your book and how many main protagonists the type of story you're telling may actually need. My first tip is to understand the difference between an equal protagonist or a deuteragonist. As I mentioned before, a protagonist character will be a character who drives the story. So typically when you have a protagonist character, their goals will be the main goals of the story. Whereas when you have a deuteragonist character, while they might have their own personal goals, their goal won't be the main goal of the story, and instead their major role in the story will be assisting the protagonist in achieving their goals. It's very rare for me to see a series in manga or anime with equal protagonists, but here are some examples of series that I think do this quite well. The first series I want to talk about with equal protagonists is Yumi Neko no Nakokoroni, which is actually my all-time favorite manga. And although at the start of the story, Battler seems like he is the true protagonist, you learn later on in the story that Beatrice is also a protagonist as well, and so I think this balance is very well kept throughout the story. Higurashi, which is Yumi Neko's prequel, also does this very well, though I won't reveal who the true protagonist is because it's a great plot twist, so you should really check out the series yourself. Your Name also has equal protagonists. We see both sides of the story from each protagonist, and neither character is more important than the other. Both of these characters drive the story, which really makes them equal protagonists. In Dororo, while the title indicates that Dororo is the main character, much of the story is shown through Hyakimaru's perspective. I would honestly say that Dororo and Hyakimaru are equal protagonists in this, and they both have a big role in the story. Nichijou also has equal protagonists because when watching the series, you can't really say that any of the character is the main character because the story is all about them, and we see just about everyone's perspective at some point during the story. So these are some examples of series with equal protagonists where it's not just one character who is a protagonist. If you have more examples of this, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. If the story is only following the goals or dreams of one character in particular, then it's likely that it only has one main protagonist. You can also tell if a story has multiple equal protagonists or not by considering whose perspective we see the story from. Stories with multiple protagonists stand apart because throughout the story, you may see the unique perspectives and viewpoints of multiple characters. In a story with multiple protagonists, the characters may also have unique goals and motivations that they might not be able to have if those characters were deuteragonists. So look at some of your favorite series and consider if they have multiple protagonists or if it's more of a series with one main protagonist and multiple deuteragonist characters that assist with the goal. When you're creating your own mangas, comics, or light novels with multiple protagonists, it's also important to give the protagonist a goal that they need to work on together. In order to keep things consistent in a story with multiple protagonists, it's important to give the characters a goal that really makes them drive the story. In many cases, in a story with multiple protagonists, you will find that the characters will need to work together to reach the goal, and they won't be able to achieve it alone. This is one of the benefits of having a story with multiple protagonists, because they will all be pursuing the goals in the story in very determined ways. And this is something you will only really see with a protagonist character. The role of a protagonist is to continue to drive and push the story, and without a good protagonist character, a story may end up falling flat because none of the characters are taking too much action. So when you have a story with lots of protagonists, or just a few main protagonists, they need to be the types of characters who do drive the story, but they need to have a good reason for doing so. So what I recommend you first do is first consider the goal of the protagonist. So what is the main goal of the story? And then from there, consider each of the protagonist's reasons for pursuing that goal. So for example, maybe there's a very bad villain in your story who needs to be defeated. The main protagonist may have different and unique reasons for wanting to do this. Maybe one of the characters was very negatively affected by this villain character. Maybe another character is actually working for the villain, but they secretly want to escape and they want to also figure out a way to defeat the villain in order to escape and be free. Or maybe there's another character who wants to protect the world and this villain is getting in the way of them doing that. So while all these characters are striving towards the main goal, they all have different reasons for doing so, and these different reasons make them stand apart, but it can also help them to strive forward in their own goals. One thing I want to mention in this tip as well is that when you're creating a story with multiple protagonists, they don't necessarily have to be working towards the same goals. I have read a lot of stories where they might be from the viewpoint of a protagonist, so the hero character, and also the villain, and the perspectives shift over the story, which is a very interesting way to write it. And of course, in these types of stories, the characters' goals are actually contradicting each other. So in most cases, when you have a story with multiple protagonists, they will all be going towards the same goal, but in some cases, when you're having a story told from the viewpoint of a hero character and a villain character, in those cases, the goals might contradict. But in every example, the characters will always need to strive towards their goals. So no matter what kind of character you're having the viewpoint from, they still need to have a goal that they are going to be really dedicated to. My third tip is give each protagonist a personal motivation. While all the characters might be striving towards the same goal, they all need to have their own personal reasons for doing it. And we did cover this a little bit in the previous tip, but I do want to talk about it a bit more here because it is really important when you're having multiple protagonists. In order to give these protagonists life in your story and make them feel realistic, they need to have a good reason why they are doing the things they're doing in your book. And this is where the motivations come in. The motivations are what makes them go towards the goal really quickly, and for a protagonist, which is, as I mentioned before, a character who needs to drive the story a lot, these characters need to have very important motivations. Basically, you need to set the stakes high so that they take action faster. It is the reason behind the goal that counts the most in these cases. So, using the villain example from before, maybe the character wants to defeat the villain because the villain has taken someone who is important to them. Or maybe the villain is going to destroy the place they care about, but they don't have much time left because the villain's plans are going into action. Or in the case of a character who might have been captured by the villain and they want to escape, maybe they know that something bad is going to happen if they don't escape quickly. So really consider why your character needs to take action quickly, and that is the point of this tip. So when you're creating equal protagonists, think about their main goal, the main goal of the story, and think about why they need to achieve it quickly. What is their motivation for achieving it? Now, as well as this, it's also important to make each protagonist stand out on their own. So consider when you're writing any of these main protagonists, think about if this protagonist was the only main character in this story, would they stand out well enough on their own? You need to ensure that each protagonist in your cast is able to stand out well enough on their own through any unique characteristics you give them, personality, design, and just overall make them the types of characters that would stand well alone. So for example, you might have one protagonist who is very bubbly and cheerful, and you might have another protagonist who is maybe more serious and stern. So think about how you can create protagonists that really balance each other out and add contrast to each other. When you create protagonists who are very unique to each other, it's going to be more entertaining for your audience to read this story with multiple main protagonists. Next, I also want to talk about how important it is to ensure that each protagonist has their own unique perspectives in the story. When you're telling a story from the perspectives of multiple equal protagonists, you also need to ensure that they all have a moment where they can show their perspective to the events at hand. When you see this in novel format, you might see that there might be a chapter with the character's name and then the content of the chapter, or you might tell the story in third person, but allow the story to give each character an opportunity to shine. When you're creating a regular story where you might just have one main protagonist and multiple other characters, you may end up seeing that most of the story is told from the main character's perspective, but the rest of the characters also play a smaller part in the story. In a story with a cast of multiple main protagonists, you may find that each protagonist's perspective needs to be shown at some point in the story. And this leads me to my next tip, which is decide on the point of view for your story. Now, this will not apply as much if you're writing a manga, but I do want to talk about it in both cases. So in the case that you're creating a manga or a comic or a graphic novel, you might show the characters' perspectives in third person. So third person is a point of view that allows you to show the events of the story from a third person perspective. So you're not seeing it from the perspective of one main character, you're seeing the perspectives of all characters in a scene. And so this can be very helpful if you're creating a story with multiple protagonists. In a manga or a comic, you might end up just switching the characters' perspectives in a scene. You might be showing the scene with one main character being the focus at one point, and then you go to a different location where the other main character might be at that point. Now, when you're writing a light novel, this might be a little bit more difficult. I recommend that when you're writing a light novel, you should choose a perspective such as first person, or third person omniscient, or third person multiple, and I will talk a bit more about these perspectives. So in the case of writing a story with multiple protagonists in first person, what you can do is you can switch the main character's perspectives every chapter or every set of chapters by having the character's name at the top of the chapter to show who is speaking in that chapter. And then from there, you can write the chapter in words like I, me, or my to show that chapter from that character's perspective. This is a good way of showing each character's unique viewpoints without it being too confusing. You can also try doing this in third person omniscient. Third person omniscient is where you can show the thoughts, feelings, and perspective of any character in a scene at any given time. So it does work quite well if you're having a story with multiple main protagonists, but this kind of perspective also allows you to show the viewpoints of any other character in your story. There's also third person multiple, which means you can show the thoughts, feelings, and perspective of a select number of characters in your story, which in this case would be the main cast of protagonists you have. And this is another good way you can switch the perspectives during the scene. Thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what kind of equal protagonists you're writing in your stories, because I'd really love to hear about them. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!